Welcome to the podcast of ReMO, the Researcher Mental Health Observatory. In the previous season of this podcast, we have heard the stories of 3 brave researchers who came forward to share their struggles on their journey through academia. In this season, we meet 3 guests who bring a different perspective. They talk about the reality of academia today, both at personal and systemic level, commenting on what works and what doesn't, and most importantly, on how to move forward. In other words, they contribute to a transformation of the research ecosystem to benefit well-being and mental health of the professionals, the people who work in it. Quote, "We refuse to see things for what they are and ask why. We want to envision things that never were and ask why not." I am Federica Bressan and I welcome you on this podcast. Welcome, everybody. Today, we've been speaking to Mateja Erce, a PhD student in renewable materials for healthy built environments at the University of Primorska in Slovenia and a ReMO ambassador. In the first part of this conversation, we talked about some of the challenges that researchers face in their careers, both at personal and systemic level, including a misleading perception of the job, which leads to wrong expectations, the pressure to produce as much as possible without a ceiling, a clear notion of how much is enough. We talked about the intensive intellectual labor as opposed to physical labor, and therefore the psychological and emotional exhaustion, and the competition among colleagues even within the same group or team. Now, Mateja, in the second part of this conversation, would you like to share with us how things would look right to you? Not really a plan for action, how to get there, but a description of what a healthy, functional, reasonable, and realistic scenario would look like for you. Give us your narrative for the future.
Okay, so for the ultimate but realistic goal, it would be that we finish our PhDs without mental health issues. And on the way, we should be supported. It's like we are not victims or babies. We don't need a babysitters or I don't know. But firstly, we need to take care of ourselves. And the other thing is still we need support because we are human beings, because everybody needs support. And when you work in the competitive atmosphere, you need a bit more support, I would say, from your peers or your colleagues or your bosses or the university. Well, you need at least somebody who can help you.
Thank you for saying that, because you're normally paid when you do a PhD and therefore it's a job. But a PhD is a training program in science, first and foremost. You're a student, you're learning, and that's why you need guidance, mentoring, and support. It's not that you're a victim or not a responsible adult. So thank you for clarifying why support is part of a healthy scenario. Ideally, psychological distress would not be part of it, but a support system would.
If we can find a way how to cooperate and not being that competitive and build strong communities, like the science communities, whatever is that, wood science or it's social sciences or whatever science, we don't need to be that competitive and everybody will feel much, much better. But to come to there, we need to change that culture of being competitive and producing hundreds of scientific papers and feeling that I'm worth as a human being, even though I don't produce these hundreds of scientific papers or project proposals or taking many classes or being involved in hundreds of cost actions.
I'll jump in again right there to say, can we really talk about competition when there are no clear goals? It doesn't seem to me that we have a target like 100 papers in a year, and then you get a permanent position, or you are excellent. It seems to me that we are all pressured to just produce more. But this is not how athletes think. They know they need to do something below a certain timing or get a score above a certain number. We don't have those clear goals in academia. So it doesn't feel much like a competition because someone wins in a competition. It feels like it's an ongoing and endless pressure to squeeze all the juice out of ourselves. And I would add, there may be healthy competition. I wouldn't demonize competition per se. I would agree with you, though, that it seems like we are pressured to keep producing more and more. And the story they tell us, the narrative we are sold, is that this is a competition.
Yeah, and it's also different. Well, it depends in which kind of environment you work, or it's a university or research institution, or I have colleagues who are employed in industry, but they are also PhD researchers. So it's different based on the environment. And with that, I mean, some things are better in, for example, in universities, some things are better at industry or research institutions. But overall, everybody feels overworked, overwhelmed with everything because you never know where to stop, where you can stop and breathe for a second, where you can stop and cry even. Because it's still perceived that if you cry, if you're tired, if you don't feel well, you're weak. That's not true. Actually, it's brave to show that I cannot work like that anymore, to have some boundaries, to say, I won't work for weekends or evenings. That should be taken as being brave, to have some boundaries, to have healthy personal work relationship. I think if we can change that, we can change a lot of things. We can change the percentage of people who are facing mental health issues in academia. If we have these healthy relationships and to recognize people that they have issues or they're exhausted and they need a break to stop.
You just talked about cooperation as opposed to competition. How do you see that? It's professional, it's more personal.
On all of these different levels, if I would say from individual level, it's that I cooperate with my boss, with my advisor, with my peers, with my colleagues, with my network on LinkedIn, with industry even. I can learn from everybody if we don't feel threatened by each other. It's like, come on, we can share the knowledge and we are richer because of this sharing of the experiences. Sometimes this cooperation means, okay, I see that you're tired or overwhelmed or something. Here is my shoulder so you can cry on, that you can rest. I don't even need to say something. I allow you to stop, even if that's, a minute or 5 minutes. I allow you to stop and breathe, and then together we will go on. And when we talk in groups regarding our ideas, we have much better ideas if we think on our own, especially if we think together with people outside of our organization. If we collaborate, like different institutions, even industry or governments or, I don't know, non-profit organizations, all together we have different experiences, but if we work together, we are much stronger. And that's part of this cooperation that I was thinking when I was saying cooperation. And even if we would cooperate within the academia, that would be a big step. Well, it is, for example, ReMO Cost Action, it's a strong community that can help. And I think we are a good example of how things can change. But if we would do that in other sciences as well, and step by step, create great, strong communities, I think everybody would feel much better. And then you can allow yourself to be weak, kind of, in that sense, even though you're not weak. If you need to stop, it's totally human to stop. It's totally human to be overwhelmed and to need, I don't know, a month off even. We need to stop. Especially, I would say, if you're a parent, oof, you need 1 month more than others, I would say.
I'm going to have you talk about ReMO and the ambassador program in a second. I would like to go back to something you mentioned in the first part of this interview, which is the perception, actually a misleading perception of this job that creates wrong expectations, especially in aspiring PhD candidates. So, how would you present the reality of this job to someone who wants to do a PhD, who maybe wishes to have a career in academia? And as a follow up question, I would ask you, is there a way to present this reality in a fair way without chasing them away, without discouraging them? So, in a way that is still appealing to them?
That one's really tough. I would prefer to improve the environment in academia than presenting PhD life more realistic. But I would say that PhD life is really inspiring and motivating, and it can give you a lot, but it can also be very demanding. You can also be sometimes very tired. And as my friend said, who just finished his PhD, he said, Mateja, you need to give up at least 10 times before you finish your PhD. And when you want to give up, you need to have a good friend there, or colleague, or a boss, or advisor, or whoever, who will, hold your head above the sea level. And I think that's the reality. Sometimes it's very beautiful. You learn a lot. You meet amazing people. You meet a lot of people. But also you need support. Without support, my friend, it will be tough.
So, considering things as they are today, how would you present the PhD life, like you called it, to an aspiring PhD candidate in a realistic way, presenting the strong points? Like you said, you meet a lot of people, you keep learning, it's very engaging, and also presenting the challenges in a way that doesn't make them think, why should I put myself through that?
Well, that really depends based on what PhD candidates expect or wish. For example, I would be joining the program if I would hear that I will meet people. Somebody else would love to hear that you are traveling after COVID, of course. Some people would, want to hear, oh yeah, we have all of these fancy machines that, help you do high level research. Somebody would love to hear that, I know you're part of this great community, or that you can learn a lot. It really depends on people, So here it's hard to generalize what would be the key message. It really depends. But I think if we are realistic with presenting things like, yeah, it's enriching experience with all of these bumps on the road, which is also kind of life, I think that's a good beginning.
True. So people will enter this path in academia for different reasons, and yet they will all be assigned a mentor or a supervisor, a key figure in the journey that lies ahead of them. Do you think that there is any advice that these young students can be given to pick a good supervisor? Or that's another thing that's completely outside our control?
Mm, I don't know how it works at the other places. I was really lucky because I knew who will be my advisor, and I knew my advisor like years before, and I knew that I can, come to him and say, "Hey, I'm tired. I cannot do it anymore. I need a break." And he will understand me, and he will even ask me how I am doing. So I knew that I'll be okay because I will have him. If you're not that lucky as I am, then you need to take care of yourself. It's hard to pick an advisor if you don't know that person like beforehand, or maybe if you're lucky you can ask your like the friends or people that you know from universities about that person. But again, if you ask somebody else, it doesn't mean that this person will fit your criteria, to say like that. If I can like somebody but you won't, because of different reasons and factors. So it's really hard to say. It's like if you don't win that lottery, you need to help yourself with finding support from your colleagues, peers, other people, or if you have a really big problem, then you need to find yourself somebody who will help you with that, even a counselor or a moderator in the conversation between you and the advisor, or you need to go to dean or rector or somebody who has a power to solve this if you cannot solve it on your own.
You know what's worrying is that we are talking about being exhausted, wanting to drop out, like normal challenges that you're going to face. It shouldn't be normal. This is exceptional, but these are the normal challenges that we're expected to face during our PhD. It's a tough journey, in fact. And because you want to make things better, not just for yourself, but people around you and people that will come after you doing a PhD in the future, you joined the ReMO Ambassador Program, a group of people who actively want to contribute to the objectives described in the Researcher Mental Health and Wellbeing Manifesto. These are not just PhD students, these are all sorts of people working in science. And I would like to ask if you can talk a little bit about this program now, and in particular, how you think that coming together as ambassadors, as activists of mental health and well-being in academia, may bring a positive change.
So, as I told you before, ReMO is really good example of the strong community. We can help each other when we have a problem. We can ask each other, like, for example, okay, I need somebody who's an expert on that area. I'm not really sure how to go there, and somebody will help me, support me, or show me a direction. The other thing is that one of the things that I pointed out is that alone, it's really hard to do something and not burn out on your way. So I want to improve mental health of academia, but because I'm working that hard to improve the mental health in academia, I will burn out. So that's not fair to myself. I'm not being fair to myself. So that's why we need this strong community, because when we help each other, we can achieve a lot. If we are alone, we will just burn out and do exactly nothing for us. So as a community, we can achieve differences on the individual level, on the university levels, even we can try to change laws.
I see where you're coming from now when you talk about competition versus cooperation. Competition seems to set some rules that almost, by definition, put us against each other, whereas cooperation is the key to achieving goals both professionally and personally, because when we do our job, we have professional goals, and in a way that has nothing to do with emotions. But we're also people carrying out that task, and how we behave with each other, how we support each other actually matters. So I see where you're coming from now when you talk about cooperation as the key to go beyond the toxic game set by the rules of competition.
Definitely. It would impact not just our work lives, but also our personal lives. When I'm overwhelmed at work, believe me, I will be overwhelmed at home, and I'll need to work on myself much more to be okay. If I'm okay at work, I can enjoy life more than just, find myself a meditation or run in the forest to, calm myself and stuff like that. If I'm okay at work, I can go in the forest and just enjoy the forest as it is, be mindful. If I'm stressed, it's hard.
Exactly. That's a good point for this conversation now. I shouldn't spend all the time that I don't spend at work compensating for the stress that I got from work.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a good take home message. But as we wrap this up, I would like to ask if you have another take home message to give our audience, or if there's something else you would like to repeat to stress, or something else I haven't asked you about.
So I would encourage everybody to seek help when you cannot do things on your own. And that can be the task or the feeling that you have. And we need to be aware that you're brave if you seek help or support, whatever support or help it is. You're not weak.
And if you speak up and say what's wrong with the workload and say that this is too much for you, that's your right. And that's the first step towards a solution that will prevent you from burning out and become a statistic. Know yourself enough to know when too much is just too much for you, and stop yourself before you burn out. Seek help before. You don't just have to seek help when you're in the ditch. When someone assigns another project to you and your to-do list just gets too long, don't say, all right, I will spend another weekend in the lab. Don't dig yourself deeper into the ground, but speak up, because actually this creates a different culture on the workplace, and it will benefit you and your colleagues because we are all working together towards this. In fact, if everybody digged themselves deeper into the ground by never saying no, they make it harder for you to say no. So if we all understand when too much is too much and refuse to burn out, that's certainly a good thing. That's a good thing to have a conversation with our supervisor. Saying no comes at a cost. And people who just tell you, well, just say no, they don't consider that saying no actually comes at a cost that sometimes a PhD student cannot afford. But instead of saying no, which is already like a final answer, maybe have a conversation with your supervisor.
And I'm valuable. And that's why I don't deserve to be burned out.
Correct. And working in academia is not just a privilege. We are an asset for academia.
Exactly. We are not paid enough for this shit.
That's what I call a take-home message. Thank you very much, Mateja, for taking the time to be on the podcast today. And thank you to our audience for listening. Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more episodes, please check out our website at remo-network.eu. ReMO is spelled REMO-network.eu. The podcast was brought to you by the Researcher Mental Health Observatory, Cost Action number 19117. I am Federica Bressan, host and producer of this podcast. Additional audio editing by Davide Linzi. Mixing and mastering by Davide Lindsay.